Let's go back in time. Bassmaster Magazine, 1982, September, October. Getting into my favorite time of the year, the fall. It always has been and still is. So, my producer here always tells me how often I say, So I'm going to try not to do that, but of course I won't succeed.
It's only when I look at the transcript.
Okay, right now, this is late in the year. We're getting toward the end of the year in the tournament season and see who again makes the Bassmaster Classic. And Angler of the Year, they had two divisions, and I have to think hard why they did that. And basically, but they wanted you to fish both divisions, and that actually determined Angler of the Year. Larry Nixon right now is leading. Tommy Martin is second. I'm third. Harold Allen is fourth. As you can see, most of those guys were Texas guys. And we were very proud of how we could kick everybody's butt back then. And in fairness, we had some of the best lakes to learn on there was. And that's really the key. You go take somebody like Billy Lowen from Ohio, where the heck is he going to find a bass? Not in the Ohio River. So when you can find a bass in some of those other states, and I'm picking on Ohio, and you can catch them there, you can catch them anywhere. But in Texas, we grew up fishing Toledo Bend and Rayburn, so we could learn real quick how to use certain lures. We didn't have to fish for a month to catch a fish on a lure. So that's the reason you see so many of these Texas boys at the very, very top. Larry Nixon was leading the Eastern Division. Tommy Martin was leading the Western Division. Larry was second. I'm fifth and fourth in the different Eastern divisions. But it's kind of, that's part of anglers just bury themselves and studying other anglers. And well, I only got one tournament left. I'm the first man in the Classic, or I'm the first man out. I've got to do better, This is an interesting article. It's about fall fishing, which was, I was already making I was nicknamed Mr. October because of winning two Classics in '76 and '77 in the fall. And I was very good then because I understood the patterns then that were really the most important. And I think other guys did indirectly, but I don't think they were as focused on them. They hadn't brought them to a complete conscious level. Like my old friend Mike Dice used to say, they were unconsciously competent sometimes. But if you're going to be consistent in tournaments, you've got to become consciously competent, which means you're aware of why. You're aware of where. Intuition plays a role in it as well. Some people's intuitions are much stronger than others. They're not necessarily much stronger, but some people believe and trust them more than other fishermen do. And because intuition is one of the most fascinating things that I studied when it came to bass fishing. Because the intellect is where all the knowledge is of what you learned, okay? Everything you've learned, let's say you're one of these young anglers nowadays, they have some vast, encyclopedias of knowledge. And they have that, they're intellectually so good nowadays, but they still haven't honed their intuition. Intuition is still more important. Why? Because intellect is never current. And in bass fishing, the most important thing to be is current. The only thing, you look at the current, right now, what's going on. I don't care how you caught them yesterday. Right now, what's going on. And you got to become current. Intuition is the only thing that can do that. It can do that. And the intellect cannot. It's always in the past. And we live in a dynamic universe, and a little bit has changed. And in the fall, I was very in tune with fishing the very backs of the creeks, okay? Like you have on this little map here, I'd break it down into sections, a creek, and I'd break the main lake down. But the backs of the creeks, which I call it Area 3. And Area 3 is this area here where you're still in the lake, but you got the channels going. Area 4 is when you're really not in the lake anymore. You've gone across probably some siltation here where it naturally gets silted in, and then boom, the creek's strong enough that it blows this part of the creek out, and you still have the good depth back in the creek. That was the #1 pattern I won my classic on in Lake Guntersville. So, and then as over time we developed other patterns, but that was my favorite back then. This article is basically is fascinating to me because this was all the original designers of lures in the most well-known companies back then. Cotton Cordell and Rebel, Joe Hughes. He was the main product.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
who
we
that
put a
was?
little bit of music in here, so y'all
was
might.
Byron Velvick.
Yeah, Byron is trying to get in on some of this information, but I'm going to go ahead and finish here. But Joe Hughes was the lure product manager at Rebel and Cordell, the Cotton Cordell's lure. Okay, James Hedden, Josh Marshman was the product manager for Hedden lures. These are all lure. Of course, these are full of a lot of those lures. Dick Codis, which I mentioned earlier, was the head of, that probably is one of the most well-known, knowledgeable anglers that didn't get really very much credit from modern-day anglers. But he designed all the albacore lures. He designed the jitterbug that flunked me out of college. Thank you, Dick. I appreciate that. I probably needed that. And and he designs, each one of these guys. I can look at Jim Bagley, of course, I was very connected to. I won the first classic. 5% of my fish came on little Bagley honeybee, a little tiny Bagley honeybee. And then I worked with Jim several years, and I won quite a few events on his Balsa B3, the big square bill. So, but back then those were made out of balsa wood. So they were not extremely durable. Balsa wood's not durable, but still. And then you had Barry Stigall with bomber bait. Bomber bait is where I won. It was one of the main lures that I used, 6A bomber, 7A bomber, when I won the Classic in 1984. So even though I didn't work with some of these other guys, they still contribute greatly to my career. Bing McCullen was, Jody Krieg was Whopper Stoppers. Some of you guys that are my age, these names might ring a bell.
What's a Whopper Stopper? Is that the company?
Whopper Stopper Lure Company.
Okay.
Yeah, and I used quite a few of their baits. They made, well, I don't see any here real quick, and I don't want to misquote, but they made some crankbaits like the I forget, bombers, and those kind of things. Been so long ago, I can't remember the names myself.
I just wondered if the Whopper Plopper had anything to do with the Whopper whatever.
No, the Whopper, that's a good, an obvious connection there, but no, it was totally different. And the Whopper Plopper was actually made by a muskie guy. He made the giant ones they fished for muskies, and then all of a sudden he decided to make a smaller one, and all of a sudden bass fishermen discovered it and realized, golly, this is one of those baits like the big Rapala 18 that I ain't gonna get many bites on necessarily, but when one hits it, he's gonna scare you. And so and David Beth Shears, this is again an era of, we're constantly trying to be more scientific about our understanding of bass, how it uses its senses, because really everybody goes, well, what lure should you fish today? What color should you fish today? All of those questions should be redirected to you. If you're worried about color, then what sense is he going to use? Is that going to determine the difference? What sense in the bass? It's sight, okay? And if it's muddy, then it ain't going to make any difference, okay? So if it's clear, then yeah, you might have to be like a trout fisherman and match the hatch. So those questions should be asked from a sensory standpoint of the bass. Like, in other words, what size blade should I put on my spinnerbait? Well, that's water displacement. Yeah, a lot of people get caught up in the flash, and that can play a little bit of a role. That's the visual part, but the lateral line is really what the water displacement is so important. You're pushing water. Everything that moves through water has to move the water out of the way. And the bigger the blade, the more water it's moving, giving the illusion of a bigger food source to the predator than it really is. And so then David Bethsher's come along. Well, the bass has a nose. Of course, will be controversial forever because the bass can't really talk to us. So how do they use scent? Is it used to determine what they're going to eat like a catfish does? We're pretty sure a catfish uses it for that reason, but does a bass? Or a lot of those senses play a role, let's say when they're spawning, but they don't necessarily play a role when they're feeding in top predators. So, but he brought out a fish former that you spray on your lures and baits and things, and see the little spray, he's got spraying on the worm there. And my way my brain works is, okay, the bass has an olfactory system. He wouldn't have it if he didn't use it. So now I just got to figure out what he uses it for. And that's true with now, the sound. We know bass are incredibly curious, any kind of sound. And if he's the dominant predator in the South, which he usually is, he's going to come check it out. Just like a big mountain lion in the woods hears something squealing, he's going to come check it out, and he's the boss. So the other predators know he's around, so they come in much slower. So the bigger predator may come in faster. But the sensory part is really very important. And so, the lateral line, I went 25 years ago, I went online, there was one biologist out of Chicago, now she's in Hawaii, studying the lateral line. There was nobody else studying it, what it did, how it worked. And yet it's probably, to me, to this day, one of the best things I've ever done, understanding the movement of baits, how they push water. And this is how they're reading it. That's why they can feed at night. That's why they can feed in very muddy water. So, and so sound is the same thing. They're very sensitive to and curious when it comes to sound. So we have artificial sounds, but then, like with Livingston, we have biological sounds. So again, how do they use it? How effective is it? I'm spending a lot of time, and I will continue to, because I know it's legit. It's not a gimmick. It's legit. It's up to me to figure out the best way to use it. Okay. Oh, again, this kind of getting right at the end of the year, and these are some of the final tournaments of the year. How they fished at Lake Eufaula, Alabama, Tom Mann's home. How they fished at Lake Wiley, which is in South Carolina, right across the North Carolina border.
Read the top 5.
Top 5 at Eufaula was Cliff Craft, which I owe a big thanks to for winning my second U.S. Open up in the Grand Canyon. He allowed me to fish those fish that he had easily thrown to. He was just a super, super human being, in my opinion. Thank you, Cliff. And anyway, of course, Larry Nixon, he became probably Larry, even more than, let's say, Kevin Van Dam, using a modern day name. Larry, I feared more than any other angler out there when I knew I was going against him. Because the one thing about Larry, our styles were totally different. But the one thing about him, he was not going to beat himself. Most of the other anglers were going to make a mistake. And I'm going to pick on you, Roland. I beat Roland on this home lake in Okeechobee because he let one fish die. We were tied technically, at the end of the tournament, and he had dead fish, which was a 4-ounce penalty, and that's what won it. So what I'm saying is the other anglers had a propensity to fail and beat themselves. I've beat myself more than anybody's beat me. So Larry was one of those type of anglers. You know, and Roland was third. Robert Harden was fourth, and John Land was fifth. Harold Allen, I'm going to mention, because he was sixth. Going to Lake Wiley, Billy Noah, who was one, he was a David Fritz type crankbait fisherman. He won at North Carolina. Larry Nixon was second again. He was second at the tournament before that. I wonder who won Angler of the Year. Looking at that, I was third. Blake Honeycutt, which Blake Honeycutt back then, and I would even if he would, him, Randy Fight, and Bill Garland were the best depth finder people on the planet at that time. And I would give anything if we can mentally, we go back in time now, but we're only doing it mentally. We can't do it physically. I sometimes wish I could, but you can't. But Randy Fight and Blake Honeycutt and Bill Garland could come into the modern era with the introduction of the forward facing, you would have been freaking blown. They would have blown people away. Because they could do almost with a flasher what these people are doing with forward facing. Light years technology-wise ahead. So, but anyway, Blake Honeycutt was one of those. How they fish the Ohio River, Larry Nixon was second. So he was second, and Ohio River he was first. So he was on a roll at this point in time. Tom Jerkowitz was second. Denny Breyer was third. Thomas Southwick was fourth. And Randall Romick, Pennsylvania, was fifth.
Where are you at in there?
I don't even want to look. That's Ohio River. I can probably tell you, it was like I said earlier when I was badmouth on Ohio. Billy Lowen had to learn how to catch bass on the Ohio River. That's amazing to me. And there's more than just Billy that came out of Ohio and are very, very good anglers. So that's kind of the wraps up back in time, 1982, September, October.